Greetings, greetings, Mambo. Hello, welcome. Happy Sunday to everybody out here on this day. As always, we are so hopeful that you're able to maintain your physical, spiritual, and mental health through these challenging times, as well as through any times. We hope you're able to do that. We certainly are glad that you're here with us for this important topic, why COVID isn't a problem in socialist Cuba. So we welcome you here today, but definitely want to point again to maintaining your health whatever way you possibly can. I have a confession to make. One of my, I don't know if people are familiar with Frantz Fanon, but Frantz Fanon was a Pan-African revolutionary who was from the Caribbean, the country called Martinique. And he eventually ended up in Algeria. He was a psychiatrist by profession. He ended up in Algeria and played a role in supporting the Algerian Revolution from the French, which ended in 1962. And Fanon wrote quite a bit about the psychology of oppression. In fact, most of what you see today in some way or another borrow some of what Frantz Fanon wrote about some 60 years ago. And Fanon wrote differently than, how a lot of people interpret oppression. The central thesis of his analysis was that as oppressed people, the only way we'll ever find liberation is by standing up and fighting the oppressor. And what I mean by that is not voting out the oppressor, but engaging in actual warfare against the oppressor. If the oppressor uses violence against us, Fanon's argument is that we have to use violence against the oppressor. And the reason why is because we're engaged in a struggle for our humanity. And if someone's standing there beating you, and you don't defend yourself, that eventually begins to erode your own ability to value yourself as a human being. So that was the basis of his analysis. And so I mentioned that because one of my what I'm admitting, one of my favorite pastimes, in this day and age when all these bullies out here like to, scope out people, target people, and bully them with white supremacy. One of my favorite pastimes, because I'm the one like Cedric the Entertainer that I hope somebody bothers me. So one of my favorite pastimes is going in rural areas. I've done it in California my whole life. When I lived in Oregon, I did it there. Back in California now, going to rural areas for my own peace and quiet. I had a writing retreat weekend this weekend, wearing my political shirts, like No Police or whichever one I have on at the moment, African hat that says African on it, traveling to these areas. This weekend, I just got back a couple hours ago. I was in this little town called Cloverdale, which is, about 150 miles north of San Francisco. And it's, one of these small towns where there are no colonized people, certainly no African people. So I went camping up there and I just enjoyed going in the stores and people staring at me, but nobody saying anything. And that to me is like the kind of the epitome of what Fanon wrote about and what he talked about. It certainly helps me feel better, because if people are going to pick on somebody, I would rather it be somebody like me who certainly knows how to fight back. So it's very fun to me and very spiritually enriching to go wherever I want to go and hopefully make a contribution in that regard. But from a personal and selfish standpoint, just being able to have that feeling that Fanon talked about. So if you haven't read Fanon's writings, you should. But welcome for coming today. Glad you're here. As always, when we start, we acknowledge the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. This is their land today, tomorrow, forever. It's their land. The Western Hemisphere was stolen from them, and we work diligently to do whatever we possibly can to ensure that they get their land back. It's not your land. It's not whose streets are streets. It's their streets. It's their avenues. It's their alleyways. It's their cities. It's their beaches. It's their forests. It's their lakes, rivers, oceans. It was stolen from them. And so there's no justice until that land is returned to them. So we always acknowledge them and we thank them for their willingness to allow us to coexist here for these years. And then also, we of course thank our African ancestors who, without question, have fought against oppression for 500 plus years, nonstop fighting against oppression. There's an unfortunate saying here that's popular these days, that's fueled by the propaganda of the capitalist system. And that saying is, we are not our ancestors. No, you most certainly are your ancestors. If you have a spirit of rebellion, where do you think you got it from? You got it from our ancestors. But the problem is that too many of us rely on the propaganda of the capitalist system, our enemy, to inform us as to what's going on with us as a people. So if you're watching the Selma movie or some crazy, idiotic interpretation of our history, then you're not going to know that our ancestors have always fought back. So we certainly have fought back. And that's why these sessions are so important. So we're thankful you're here. And, you know, everyone will stay muted that's on the Zoom system. But if you have comments or questions, please write them in the chat if you're on Zoom, and then those on Facebook, please do the same. People on Facebook generally have no problem doing that, and that's a wonderful thing. But let's go ahead and get started. And again, just want to say again, because we mean it, thank you for joining us. And so first, introductions. My name is Ajamu Umi, longtime organizer for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And the AAPRP is the sponsor of this event and is a sponsor every week. The party exists throughout the African continent, based in Africa, and throughout the Caribbean, Europe, and the Western Hemisphere. And if you want to get an understanding of what that is, we'll talk about that in a second. But first, I want to acknowledge my outstanding and marvelous daughter, Shakura. We do these together every week. Shakura grew up in the Young Pioneer Institute of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Now she's working on her doctorate so she can continue to develop her outstanding activist work around African women's health issues where she is. So extremely proud of her and her commitment to justice and her willingness to work with her dad on these Sundays to engage the world in ideas around liberation. And then back to who we are in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So the book that you see there, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, written by Kwame Nkrumah, the founder of our party in 1968. The book details the necessity for revolutionary Pan-Africanism, which we define, as you see there, as one unified socialist Africa. That's important because Pan-Africanism can be defined many different ways, but we define it specifically as one unified socialist Africa. And our objective of Pan-Africanism is, as outlined in Nkrumah's book, is to unite all revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground throughout Africa. So the logos you see there, Democratic Party of Guinea, African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, two separate countries. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. Azania is what you call South Africa. The Azanian People's Organization, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Nigeria, the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, and many more, the Pan-African Union for Sierra Leone, and many more. All of these forces identify their objective as Pan-Africanism, and they define Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa. So we are engaged in a process of uniting all of these elements into one worldwide fighting force of Pan-African revolutionaries set on achieving our objective. And we have chapters worldwide, all throughout Africa, as I mentioned, the Caribbean, Western Hemisphere, and we also have very principled and strong relationships with other liberation movements fighting against capitalism and international imperialism, the Filipino National Liberation Movement, the Irish National Socialist Liberation Movement, the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, and of course, as I mentioned, the movement for independence, land reclamation by the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. So that's who we are, and welcome to this topic today on why there's no COVID crisis in Cuba. And so we'll start, and I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to echo what my dad said. I'm sure that there are other things you could be doing. One thing I've noticed with the pandemic is that there's even more housework that needs to be done. So if you are choosing to join us while you are sacrificing your time to do something else, I do thank you. And I'm super excited to be here with the party and with my dad. Cuba is one of my favorite countries, and I'm just always grateful to learn and read as much as I can about it. I have yet to travel there, but it's definitely on my bucket list. And when that day comes, I just hope I can contain my excitement, because I think the central theme that I hope you can take away after I'm done giving my slides for today is that this country has no problem with putting people first and valuing people. And I know that that's a concept, if you were born on this soil, United States, then that's not something you're familiar with. But allow me to help you kind of think about this from a different framework, if you will. So since socialism revolution means a focused commitment to elevating the needs of people above profit, Cuba has demonstrated that by building a system where there is one doctor for every 120 people in Cuba. Can you imagine? One doctor for every 120 people in Cuba. By comparison, if you ask, in the United States, there is one doctor for every 12,000 people. So obviously we can see where that would lead to some disparities, mishaps in communication, access, resources, all these things, and unequal treatment, all these things, the list goes on and on. And of course in Cuba, all in all, healthcare is absolutely free of charge. Let me repeat that. Of course in Cuba, all in all, healthcare is absolutely free of charge. Why is this, you might ask? This is because Cuba has a culture and social system where everyone matters. Health, humanity are focal points in Cuba for all people. No matter if your contribution, my dad mentioned this maybe 2 or 3 seminars ago, no matter if your contribution is sanitation or optometry, if you are considered a medical provider, if you're considered a daycare provider, whatever your niche is in terms of how you contribute, everyone is treated with the same respect, and Cubans appreciate one another. Cuba has taken their socialist example to literally dozens of the poorest countries. Cuba is credited with providing a leadership role in helping to eliminate Ebola in West Africa in 2014. They have also responded by making medical schools training available free of charge to anyone who wants it. So there was a group in Sacramento when I was growing up, I don't know if it's still operating, Daddy, but they literally would have fundraisers so that students who are interested in pre-med, biology, anything like that, could travel with this group, go to Cuba free of charge, if memory serves me correctly, and attend medical school, and then feel free to practice anywhere in the world. So this includes medical students from the United States, where thousands have been trained in Cuban medical schools. Due to the US's hatred of Cuba's socialist system and their unwillingness to ever accept the Cuban people's rights to establish their own political and economic system, this isn't subservient to US capitalism. So basically, because Cuba is resisting the United States' bully tactics, Cuban medical credentials are not recognized in the United States. So if you do practice in Cuba and then you graduate, you can't come back to the United States and practice because it won't be recognized. And it is because of that that in the United States, although students who study medicine in Cuba routinely overpower the US's medical board's exams with ease. So again, I want us to think about, what does this mean from a large scope? We talked maybe 10 or so seminars ago about the fact that Cuba already has an antiviral treatment that they are using for their COVID patients in Cuba. And so this is one of the reasons why their cases are not out of control like the United States, because they not only have a framework and a model of how they're going about controlling the virus, but they ethically are applying how they want humanity to survive from this crisis and move forward in a way that works for everyone from an economical and social standpoint. If I had to give it to you in another way, I would say, so basically we're looking at another example of the United States acting like a bully to other countries who do not fall in order with the US demands. My dad said a long time ago, and this stuck with me, that it is so much easier to swim with the stream than against it. Both of my parents made it a priority to go to Cuba and spend time with the remarkable and incredible warrior, Sister Assata Shakur. Now that I am older and doing work to help cease and destroy exploitive practices against African women and their children, my mom shares stories with me that really stick with me when she spent her time with Assata. And one of the stories that she shared with me was that there was a group of construction women who were hired to do a project. Many of the workers were mothers themselves and ran into issues with completing the project in a timely manner because childcare was an issue. And so the workers decided to organize and stop working on the project, take time to organize and not only help build, but create and sustain an infrastructure that allowed them to have childcare provided for them while they were at work doing construction. And this is just one of many examples of how Cuba really does try to make sure that their environment works for everyone there, because they're trying to think about how they can collectively make a difference for everyone so that the country can continue to benefit all of humanity. Next slide, please. Okay, so the United States economic blockade, institutionalized in 1962, resulted from the United States' anger at Cuba daring to establish a socialist state just 90 miles of the US territory. That was especially since this was especially since before the Cuban Revolution, which was victorious in its first step in 1959, Cuba, like many of the Caribbean remains today, was considered a tourist playground for rich US tourists. Many of you might remember the Tropicana Hotel from the famous show, I Love Lucy by Ricky Ricardo, and the television show, which can still be found on the air today, even though it was filmed almost 60 years ago. Now, the hotel in the show, the Tropicana, was a luxurious hotel ran by the criminal mafia, which served as a place where the US celebrities and high-level individuals enjoyed the beauty of the Melcon beachfront from the Tropicana overlooks. All of that has gone away as the Cuban Revolution seized all assets on the island from the private interest who used them for exploitive purposes. Now, the Tropicana and everything else in Cuba is part of the equation to being about socialist development on that island. The United States, always angry about these developments, established the criminal blockade to attempt to starve the Cuban people into submission to the United States imperialism. 60 years later, the Cuban Revolution continues. Brother Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Vilma Espin, Celia Sanchez, Juan Alameda, and all of the original warriors of the Cuban Revolution, our ancestors now, may they rest in peace, and we thank them for all their sacrifice. But the Cuban Revolution marches on, a lutua continua. Thank you so much.
All right, so let's talk about, thank you, Shakura. Wonderful. And let's talk about how Cuba has actually managed the COVID crisis. Okay, so the first thing that I think must be understood is that, as Shakura mentioned, because Cuba's system is based on human beings above profit and not the backward capitalist model of profit over people that exists in the United Snakes of America and all these capitalist countries, they had no problem transitioning to implementing a process that would ensure people were tested. They had tested up to, the last time I checked, which was more than almost 2 months ago, they had tested close to 40% of the 11 million people there on their island. So they prioritized that. And then that's very important because obviously, you know, once you do that, you can get a very real picture as to where the virus is concentrated, what efforts need to be made to confront it and prevent it from spreading further. And so as of last week, Cuba had 2,428 infections. That's only 0.0, not even 1% of their population, okay? And if you compare that to this country with over 3 million infections, 350 million people, and you know, that's my figure, 350 million. They say it's less, so even based on their figures, the percentage would be higher, but it's almost 6% of this population has been infected. So, you know, that tells you right there, if you were able to manifest a system similar to what they've been able to do there, you could probably do quite a bit to alleviate that level of suffering that we've experienced in this country. So, you know, Shakur mentioned the Cuban antiviral drug interferon alpha 2B. And so interferon alpha 2B was developed by Cuba's medical community in 1981. And at that time, when Cuba had their what they call auto-financing economic system, which was basically a partnership with the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, the Soviet Union was able to help them develop that drug, that antiviral drug. And the way the drug works is it works with the body's proteins to build up the body's immunity system. You know, if you think about a virus, like if you get a cold, there's no cure for the cold. There's no vaccine for the common cold. But what you do, all the things you do, all the medicines you take, everything you do, eating soup or whatever it is you do, is designed to strengthen your body's immunity system so your body itself can fight off the virus. Well, that's what interferon alpha 2B was designed to do at that time to combat HIV/AIDS in Cuba. And so what Cuba actually ended up being able to do is they developed the drug despite of limited medical resources. They didn't develop interferon alpha 2B by relying on buying pharmaceuticals. They did it by placing a strong emphasis on their biomedical industry, where they develop their own medicines, because the US blockade prevents countries who have pharmaceutical technology from trading it with Cuba. So they have to develop their own. So they developed this interferon antiviral drug, and they used it to treat HIV/AIDS patients. And as they developed it, they actually became the first country on earth to eliminate mother-to-child HIV transmissions. This country still hasn't done that. And also many other things they were able to do. Cervical cancer is basically non-existent in Cuba, and a lot of the other calamities that happen here every day, they've been able to effectively eliminate. And so when the COVID crisis came, and it came to Cuba initially by way of Italian tourists, as best that they can track it. If you remember, at the time when Italy was in the initial phases of this pandemic, Italy was one of the hot spots. And so the Italian tourists there, they were able to take them and treat them effectively. And to actually all three of those people survived. And so from that, Cuba actually, as they always do, went into their humanitarian mode of helping other countries get the COVID crisis under control. And so at the time of this session today, they've been in 50 countries with thousands of medical personnel helping those countries fight the COVID crisis. Meanwhile, the richest country in human history, the United States of America, not only can't even manage the virus here in this country, but has gone to 0 countries to help them. Man, how you gonna help somebody else manage a problem you can't even manage yourself? It's out of control. You're the world leader in the problem. You can't help anybody else. So I saw a meme today that kind of summed that up when it said that the US has had no response to the pandemic, but yet they were able to create all of these resources to militarize the cities in the US to combat protests against white supremacy. So that tells you right there what the priorities are from this government. So this is a beautiful thing, this internationalist mission. And you have to understand something about Cuba. This picture says it all. In Cuba today, medical personnel, doctors, nurses, the custodians who clean the hospitals, everybody who interacts with the medical system, they're viewed in Cuba as national heroes. They're viewed there the way the capitalist system here constantly pressures you to view police and military here. The difference is they have saved millions of lives with their work. The police and the military here have murdered millions of people with their work. So these are not heroes here. I don't care whether your daddy was in the military or whatever, they're not heroes. Sorry, they're not. These people, these medical folks in Cuba are actually saving and improving people's lives. So people view them correctly as national heroes. And so this effort that they've made in these 50 countries has been despite having very limited resources, but they prioritize making sure that whatever resources they have go into this process to make people's lives better. That's very important for people in this backward country to understand, because people here, really try to act like what's happening here is the best that can be done. And if we just vote one clown out and vote the next clown in, that's going to solve the problem, and not understanding that that's never going to, the problem will stay here until a system is created where the people are prioritized. And that can only happen when the people themselves are the managers of the system. So that's what you have there. And that's a different discussion about, the entire level of democracy. Because when Cuba does something like their medical missions, this is something that's debated by millions of people in Cuba. I mean, you want to talk about democracy. Who here on this call got a call during any of the US invasions anywhere asking you whether or not this country should invade those countries? That doesn't happen here. You don't have any say in anything. You don't have any say in what the COVID crisis would be, and nothing. So, people here have no understanding of democracy, and that's a different discussion for a different day. But the national heroes and the ability for the Cuban people, despite their limited resources, to support their efforts abroad. I mean, it's truly an amazing thing, especially when they're being constantly attacked by this system. Even right now, these reactionary shoe scum politicians like Marco Rubio and people like that are working overtime to strengthen the US blockade against Cuba, to prevent them from doing the work they're doing to fight COVID around the world, to limit their ability to do that. And although Cuba has offered to bring Intifar and Alpha 2B here to the US to treat people here, they've denied that from happening. They've prevented that from happening. They've done everything they could to do that. And in fact, according to leaked White House memos here, the Trump administration has stated that Cuban policy today is whatever, quote unquote, Marco Rubio wants, quote unquote. So they don't even, these people aren't even astute as to what's going on. Like, it's just all a game, because if you study Trump's history, his business history, he led the way in terms of trying to open up trade relations with Cuba so he could do business there, open hotels there. And he even actually got fined money 20 years ago because he sent a team there to do research about opening hotels there, which is in direct violation of the US blockade. So today, the fact that he supports the blockade is a political manipulation. It has nothing to do with any sound reasoning. The blockade itself has nothing to do with that. So with all of that understood, these international missions are just truly amazing. It's in my opinion, one of the sure highlights in what's happening in the world today. And the best part about this, and especially for those of you who doubt the sincerity of the Cuban Revolution, and we get it, you get capitalist propaganda 24/7, 365 days a year. And the reason why we had the slide of Fidel Castro's book, In Defense of Socialism, is because we know you haven't read it. We know you haven't read a single book about socialism. We know you haven't read a single book about Cuba. You don't know, all you can come with, those that take the position of anti-Cuban revolution, is that, well, you knew some clown that lived in Cuba. And because this clown told you something, then that's your rationale and your basis for why you question the Cuban Revolution. And clearly this logic is absolutely absurd, you all. There's no other way to describe it. I mean, if you think about the city you live in, wherever, it can be anywhere in the world, wherever you live, you think about the city you live in, you can knock on your neighbor's doors right now and find 90% of them who were born and raised wherever you live and can tell you absolutely nothing about the political conditions in the city you live in. So there's no question that is not the criteria to determine whether somebody understands something just because someone's from somewhere. That could be your criteria. That's not mine. My criteria has to be, you have to provide some data and some analysis. You have to demonstrate that you've studied and participated in that struggle for me to respect your opinion. Just because you're from somewhere, that means nothing. So we know, and this is what I mean by data, what I'm about to say. We know that all of this international work that Cuba has done, the 50 countries helping them against the COVID crisis. The fact that Cuba spent, we talked about this last week, sent 500,000 troops to Southern Africa in the late 80s and 90s to defend Southern Africa against racist apartheid, which was attempting to spread throughout the entire southern region of our homeland. Zimbabwe, Azania, what you call South Africa, all of these countries, Namibia, Mozambique, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, all of these countries. And Cuba was the one force in the world that stood up to defend our people. And the fact that they do all these things, they've received nothing in return for that. The people who were fighting to spread apartheid were mercenaries. They were paid by the apartheid regime in what was then the Republic of South Africa. They were paid through the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, criminals in action. They were paid to engage in murder and brutality against African people fighting for liberation in Southern Africa. The Cubans have received nothing. They've received nothing for traveling to 50 countries. So if that's not evidence to you of a people in a revolution that places people above profit, and if that's not evidence about how much more advanced socialism is than capitalism, then there's no argument that can sway you. You just one of the people that just has to go when we get strong enough in our revolutionary struggle. I mean, clearly, you know, they have lost a lot. They started out with little. They've contributed an overwhelming amount, and they've received nothing in return. And they've done that not once, not twice, but repeatedly. I could sit here and name a number of these international missions that they've engaged in, where they have gone through the same process, and they have received nothing. So that's an example of, to us, of humanism at the highest level that it can exist. And we honor that. We think that that's a wonderful thing that needs to spread. Socialism needs to spread. So let's talk a little more about the efforts to sabotage Cuba's humanitarian work. So as we talked about, you know, this country, the United Snakes, has done everything it can to attempt to sabotage Cuba's effort to carry out these humanitarian missions. Now think about that for a second. Think about that for a second. You pay taxes, those of you that live in this country, you pay taxes to a government that does everything it can to sabotage Cuba's effort to help humanity. Meanwhile, this government is doing nothing to help humanity. After the flooding in New Orleans in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, when all the African people were left to die in the streets of New Orleans, Cuba offered a tremendous humanitarian package to help assist them. Meanwhile, this government was sitting on its hands doing nothing. Why? Because they wanted to drive African people out of New Orleans because their development plan didn't have room for a 67% African population in New Orleans that was primarily poverty-based. So their rationale for addressing that was just to drive us out of town by either allowing us to be killed or to just force us to leave. And so this was their strategy after that. And Cuba, not just Cuba, but a number of people, even, you know, celebrities talked about this. Sean Penn, Brad Pitt, people like that. They went to New Orleans in 2005 to try to help people and ran up against all types of obstacles and absolute antagonism from US government officials at that time. And so they have a history of doing that to Cuba in any efforts to help humanity. And so with this COVID crisis, what they've done, as I mentioned, was make every effort to strengthen the US blockade, economic blockade against Cuba, and do that primarily by applying pressure on any countries that would do anything to assist Cuba's efforts. And that means like countries that have airlines that are flying these Cuban medical personnel to Africa and these other places, applying pressure on them not to allow the Cubans to fly on their airlines. Of course, any supplies that they needed to help them in the work that they're doing, applying pressure on the companies producing those supplies to prevent them from getting into Cuban hands. And in fact, the US government has confiscated God knows how much into foreign Alpha 2B that was being shipped by using their criminal blockade as a justification for seizing these medicines, which are simply used to help people get better and save people's lives. So, you know, in terms of preventing it and putting pressure on trade relationships to prevent these antiviral drugs from traveling, and even up to and including threatening people with criminal charges and jail, potential jail time for assisting in this effort. This is what's happening right now with your tax dollars. And all of this has gone on despite the fact that Cuba has clearly demonstrated that they know how to deal with this virus. Without question, nobody here knows how to do it, or at least is not in a position to do it, or doesn't have the support to do it. One of those three, or probably a little bit of all three. But Cuba has clearly demonstrated that they know how to do that by the numbers we previously gave. There's no question about that. They don't even have 1,000 people on the entire island who have the virus right now. And all those people are being identified and being treated. So, you know, what happens here is, despite the fact that, you know, we mentioned Italy, and you remember it started out with China, Italy, these countries, and the Cubans were there. The Cubans were the ones who helped China understand how to curtail the virus. And now China and Italy are on their way back to essentially functioning as they were before the virus, you know, with whatever social adaptations they've had to make. But they're having sporting events, they're doing everything because they've effectively managed the virus. And that is something that cannot be ignored, and you can't ignore that. Meanwhile, these state governments here in this country are having to shut down again because there's no plan. None of you know what the plan is here to combat COVID, because there isn't one. There is no plan to combat it. You can't say, well, this is what's happening. This is how people can get tested. This is how people can get treatment. If you don't have health insurance, this is how you can get help. You can't speak to that because none of that exists here. You know, the most effective healthcare people have in this country right now who don't have healthcare through their job is GoFundMe. And that's about as primitive as you can get. So, you know, just talking about the advantage Cuba has because of their socialist system. You know, contrary to popular belief, we need to say this. The overwhelming majority of the Cuban people support the Cuban Revolution. Let's say that one more time. The overwhelming majority of the Cuban people support their revolution. How can we say that? Well, one of the ways, again, using data, not just listening to your friend who escaped one economy based on slave culture, Cuba, to come to another one, the United States, built on slave culture, not listening to somebody like that, but analyzing some data and saying that 75% of the people in Cuba today were born after the revolution, right? So you're talking about people who have always had free healthcare, have always had free education. You're not going to be able to convince them that a better system is one where they have thousands of dollars of student debt for getting an education, where they have thousands and they have to file bankruptcy because of hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. You're not going to be able to convince them that that's a better system. You know, there was these right-wing reactionaries are really something. There was an young African child that was killed by the police in Cuba a short time ago. And these people tried to use that to attack the Cuban Revolution, saying the Cuban Revolution was anti-African and all of these things. And you know, a lot of people picked up on that and carried it because, again, we don't read, we don't study about it. Because if we did, we would know that, yes, that did happen, but there hasn't been a police shooting of African people in Cuba before that in years. I mean, years, long time. Okay, so there's no comparison between that single incident in Cuba and rampant, systemic, state-sanctioned police terror against African people in the United States. There's no comparison whatsoever between that. And we can sit down and show you the numbers if you believe there is, and show you how absurd that is. So clearly, the people there, born since the revolution, support the revolution. And then remember, revolutions are always fought for the people on the bottom of the society. So since the entire Western Hemisphere was built on the theft of indigenous people's land and the enslavement of African people, African people, of course, are on the bottom of every society in the Western Hemisphere, every society in the world, because of colonialism plus slavery. And so the majority of people in Cuba today are African people, people with African roots, an estimated 70% of the people that live there now. Because we know this is true because 98% of the so-called Cuban exile society in Southern Florida, those scum people in Southern Florida, that's what they are. They're all European descended people. They're all white people. Those are the people who left the Cuban Revolution. Good riddance. You know, when I was there in 1994, it was during they had the rafts. People were getting on rafts, and they were down, as Shakur mentioned, the Malecon, which is where the Tropicana Hotel is. I walked the Malecon every day I was there for several weeks, and you could see the people out there building the rafts. And the U.S. capitalist news constantly was showing that. They were showing it before I got to Cuba. These people building these rafts, 2 or 3 people building a raft, ready to launch it in the water to get to freedom, U.S. democracy. That's what they were showing you. But what they didn't show you is on the Malecon, to those 200 or 300 people who were building rafts, there were 20,000 people standing on the Malecon yelling in Spanish, "Get the hell out of here. We don't want you here. Get out of here." They had signs. I got video of it if you want to see it. You know, they had signs saying, "Get out of here. We don't want you here. We don't want you as a part of our society." And a lot of those people doing that were African people because they understand the revolution was fought for them. Was it perfect? No, nothing is perfect, but it's a work in progress, and progress is being made. So people in Cuba support their revolution, no question about that. And then, you know, another thing this country tries to do is deceive you with this misinformation. So one of the things, if you know about this, or if you don't, you should look it up. There was this organization called Ladies in White, and they would march around in white. You can look it up on the internet. Just type in Ladies in White in Cuba. And they would march around in Havana, Santiago, Trinidad, other cities in Cuba, Santa Clara, and they would protest against government racism and all these things that they were charging. But now the reason why you don't hear so much about this group today is that it was uncovered that they were funded by these right-wing reactionaries in Southern Florida. They got all their funding. So, you know, one thing to understand about national uprisings is that they don't happen because they're funded by people outside of the country. You know, you don't have a legitimate coup d'etat in Venezuela led by a guy that went to Princeton. That doesn't happen like that, you all. Mass uprisings are simply that. They're uprisings from the people on the street opposing their oppression. They're not happening by bourgeoisie influences from abroad. So that's what this Ladies in White movement was. And it's not to say that, you know, Cuba's perfect, there's no problem. Of course. I mean, I just said, Cuba's society was built on theft of indigenous people and enslavement of African people. So of course there's racism in Cuba. Of course those attitudes exist, just like they exist here and they exist everywhere in the world, because this was the system of which, you know, the societies were built. But the difference between what they've done in their socialist system and what you have here is that it took them a while, even after the revolution, but they've come to recognize that. So the way they've come to address that is by making the struggle to educate people against white supremacy an official policy of their government, where white supremacy is taught in the schools, where LGBTQ, respect for folks who are LGBTQ is taught in the school. It's a curriculum in Cuban schools. So since education is free, imagine what those ideas and attitudes are going to be 2 generations from now. They will be completely different than they are today. All the people who have the old racist views will be dead. And you'll have people who have a much better education and understanding of that. Is something like that happening here? Nowhere. The only where it's happening is where activists and organizers like us have independent schools. It's certainly not happening in the organized school systems here. They uphold white supremacy every day. They uphold patriarchy. They uphold homophobia in the school system here. So there's no question that, you know, this government works to confuse people here about Cuba. So you don't understand how Cuba is engaged in positive work to protect people against things like COVID, to wipe out white supremacy and patriarchy and all those things. And they send all this confusion our way to, keep us from understanding those basic principles of what they're doing there. So, let's just say again that the difference is that in a socialist society, you have a planned economy. It's planned around the fact they've got 12 million people. They plan on how to take care of those people. And so that's why when Hurricane Katrina and all the other hurricanes hit Cuba, their death toll is, the US had over 1,000 people, I think it was 1,800 people killed from Hurricane Katrina. Guess how many people Cuba had killed from Hurricane Katrina? 5 people. And Cuba was much more in the eye of that storm than the US was. We got to start asking the questions, why is that? Because they have a planned economy based around protecting people. They have a plan that everybody knows because they're local organizations, the Committees in Defense of the Revolution, the CDRs, they are going to the communities, door to door, making sure people have the information. They're engaging debates. People can give their opinion. Millions of people. When Cuba does something like adding LGBTQ rights to their constitution, which they just did last year, it was debated. They estimate by 8 million people of their 11 million population had a say-so in that. You got to understand, that's what democracy is. We don't have anything like that here. So there's no plan. When something, if an earthquake hit here right now, you don't know what to do. I mean, if you haven't just prepared something individually for yourself and your family, you don't know what to do. You don't even know where to go for safety. You know why? Because there is nowhere to go. That's not a part of the plan here. That's why. There's nowhere to go for you and me. There's places to go for the bourgeoisie, but there's nowhere to go for you and me. We're just supposed to die. We're supposed to work, make profits for them, and then die. That's the objective here. So, as we close, left a few minutes extra just to try to, again, and this is every week, and it'll be every week, and I said this before, I'll just say it again. The reason why we always talk about this joining organizations is that we're propagandists. We're a propagandist political party, and we understand how propaganda works. And so I can tell you it has been exactly 35 years since I've had beef, since I've consumed beef. But I can tell you right now, to all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. I can tell you McDonald's slogan, because why? Because they pumped it constantly. They know you know it. They already understood you knew it, but they still did it because they want you to think about it unconsciously. So that's why we are constantly talking about the need to join organizations. If you tune into these seminars, if this is your first one or if it's your 15th one, we can tell you that we come up with these topics, we research them, and we do it. Why? Because our basis is one of political education. And what that means is that I didn't just rely. Now, I went to the bourgeois institutions. I got a master's degree in economics, political science. I did that. And because I did that, that's why I can tell you that that is not enough if you truly want to understand what's going on in this capitalist system and what's going on in the world. That is not going to provide you with the ability to understand that. In fact, that process will further confuse you from understanding what's going on. The way that I was able to get the consciousness that I was able to obtain is because of the work study process of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which I started 36 years ago. And what that process looks like, you all, is every 2 weeks, we have a meeting where we read material and we discuss the material with each other. We rotate facilitation so everyone gets the skill in facilitating a meeting, developing questions, facilitating discussion, all of that. And we do that. If you think about the example I gave about Cuba's ability to have debates on issues, that's because they trained their organizers on how to facilitate that process. Well, that's what we're doing. And we do that all over the world. We have work study circles all over the African continent, in Europe, in Canada, throughout the United States, in the Caribbean. We do this. And everybody who participates in the APRP has to participate in a work study circle. So I'm sure you can envision 36 years of doing that. yeah, you're going to develop some pretty strong facilitation skills. You're going to have a pretty good, not only a good analysis of the world, but you're going to have a really strong ability to break down things when they happen. You're not going to have to rely on bourgeoisie news to do it. You're going to have your own foundation. You're going to have your own resources. You're going to have independent analysis that can help you come to conclusions that are based in justice and not based on propaganda by multinational capitalist corporations. So our thrust is that every organization, first, everybody's got to be in an organization. We got to get people in organizations. And so people constantly say the same thing. You know, they say, well, I'm not an organization because I'm busy. I don't have time for that right now. Organization is, it's like some things are not really a choice like that. Like belonging to an organization for justice, exercising, taking care of yourself. These are not things you can say, I don't have time to do. You have to do these things if you want to have a productive life and you want to live in a productive society. You have to do that. And I think it's funny. I mean, just to be honest with you all, I think it's funny when people tell me they don't have time to be in organizations. I mean, they're saying that to someone like me who works full-time in an organization, who recruits and organizes in that organization, who slaves full-time in the capitalist system, who writes, who produces books. I'm working on 2 different books now. I've already published 4 others, working on 2 more. I mean, it's funny to me when people tell me, oh, I don't have time. Because I know that that's just a question of organization. And if I sit down with you and go over how you spend your days, I can guarantee you we can find time. Just like if I sit down with you and go over your budget, I guarantee you we can find money that you don't even know you're spending, that you're wasting. I can guarantee we can find time you don't even know you're wasting. You know, people that I know watch a lot of television. People that I know spend a lot of time getting high, tell me they don't have time. And I'm not saying you can't watch television and you can't get high. That's your choice if that's what you want to do. But don't come and tell me you don't have time. You got time. You're just not utilizing your time properly. So everybody, yes, we don't back down from that. Needs to be in an organization because you cannot solve the problem by yourself. You can't, even if you have the best ideas in human history, you can't solve the problem by yourself. Marcus Mosiah Garvey said that the reason why people have to come together to solve our problems is that at most we live 70, 80, maybe 90 years. The earth is hundreds of thousands of years old, millions of years old. So no one person lives long enough to understand the workings of the earth. But when we unite with someone and we got 10 people who have 50 years, now we got some experience working for us. So that's why organization is so important. Plus, we're all gonna die. And so even if you do have the best solution to the problem, if you don't share it and participate with other people with it, what good is it? It dies when you die. And so if we look at human history, clearly this perception that I can solve the problem, I can figure it out on my own, is not effective because you're not figuring out the problem. The problem is still here. So if you have a solution and you can do it on your own, please, I beg you to do it. Please put it into action and solve this problem and help us all out. If you know how to do that on your own, do that. But the reason why you're not doing that is because you can't do it on your own. So there's no question that everybody has to be in organization. And there's also no question that being in an organization doesn't mean you have to submit to Robert's Rules of Order. Organization is 2 or more people working for a common objective. It can be any format you wish. That's up to you. 2 or more people working for a common objective. And so you can do that. And once you do that, you have people in there. You must have a political education program, as I described, like we have work study process. You have to have that. And your political education program has to be based in anti-capitalist, anti-white supremacy, anti-patriarchal, anti-homophobic. It has to be based on those things because those are the foundations of building a just society, right? So we have to have that. And then if you're in Africa, if you're African, we invite you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And if you're African in Africa, we certainly invite you to do that, to engage in the work we mentioned at the start of this seminar. And if you're not in Africa, we invite you to join. And we want to push this concept of community defense, which is a way for us to link up with our struggle to build on the ground revolutionary forces in Africa Africa. It's a political strategy to do that. So we ask you to do that. And we think that if we do those things, then we are creating the foundation to make fundamental change in this society. It's great that people are out protesting. That's a wonderful thing. We're not speaking against that. We're just saying we need to take that to the next level. And the next level is not just spontaneous protest, but organized revolutionary struggle. That's the next element, because we can't be doing all this to save capitalism. That's not going to solve the problem. So we have to be doing this to try to ensure that we build and create something better. So I saw something, and I can comment on this because I used to live in Portland, Oregon. I saw something where a seemingly well-intentioned person, during the protest, they're having protests there because, federal fascism, and someone, went and sat in front of the police with no clothes on. And a lot of people see that and they're like, oh, this is a wonderful thing, because I guess when the police saw that, they left. But the problem is that's a well-intentioned effort. I get it. It's well-intentioned. Somebody wanted to do something. But the problem with this is that this is another example of how we do things based on making ourselves feel better about the problem instead of really engaging seriously to solve the problem. Because yeah, the police left, but y'all, they coming back. Okay, they coming back. They ain't going nowhere. They're coming back. So great, valiant effort, but that type of spontaneity is not going to solve the problem. It just isn't. And so the only thing that will solve it is the organization of the masses of the people. So we ask people to, if you're African, join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And you can join us by going to our site, our international site there, aaprp-intl.org. And you can make an inquiry about membership. And if you want to know more about the work study circle process, you can do that there. You don't have to be a member of the AAPRP to participate in work study circle processes, but you do have to be African, of African descent. And then if you want to know more about, on a local level, what's happening here with the work that, I happen to participate in, and also some of the writings that I do, there's a blog there, betterworld.me, Jamu Umi's Truth Challenge. So you can go there, and you can also reach out if you want to talk about joining the party. You can do that there as well. And then also the other, hoodcommunist.org. This is a collection of African revolutionaries who write. I'm one of them. So we encourage you to check that out. What do all three of these sites have in common? They're independent, revolutionary, Pan-African, organizing information entities where you can get information independent of the capitalist media, even independent of the white left, because their analysis is not our analysis. Okay, we have nothing against them. We certainly want them to get their act together, but they don't speak for us like we don't speak for them. They don't speak for our Pan-African movement. We speak for our Pan-African movement. So if you want to understand how African people see the world and how African revolutionaries see the world, then these vehicles right here will help you do that. Okay, with that, I don't know, Shakur, is there anything you wanted to address? I didn't see anything.
Yeah, so our comrade Imani wants to know, if you're non-African, what resources are available. I think that might be a question where they would reach out to you on your blog, perhaps, or
yeah, please.
I mentioned the PRP YouTube page as well. So
yes.
Okay, cool.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and just to build on that quickly, so if you're not African, I usually say this, but I forgot because I'm tired, because I've been out here trying to challenge white supremacy. But if you are not African and you want to start an organization and you want to do that, our resources are limited, please understand that, but we will do our best to help you do that. But we're only interested in helping you build an organization that has political education. We're not interested in just helping you. If you just want to build something to elect people, great, more power to you, but that's not what we do. So if you want to build a grassroots organization, you don't have to be African to do that. We'll help you do that. We would love to work with you. So yeah, reach out, betterworld.me, and let me know. But be ready to work. Like I can't just, I can't just be a source for you to vent the problems of the world. I got my own problems and struggles I'm trying to deal with. Like, That's just not an effective use of my time. You need to be able to do that, but I'm just not the right person for you to do that with because I'm trying to build something. We're trying to build something. So if you're ready to do some work, yeah, come on, let us know. We'd love to talk. All right. So we want to thank you all for coming in today. We hope you gain some valuable information that can help you talk to people, go out and talk about this to the world, help people understand that we can have something better, so that we're not suffering. We can do that. And that's the point that we're trying to make. And so we'll be back next week. We'll keep this going as long as it's viable. And we'll be back next week with a different topic. So we please ask you to spread the word. Obviously, we can't advertise. But if you can talk to people and let them know, that's great. And I know a lot of you are doing that. So we appreciate that. We appreciate you. Do something nice for the rest of this evening. Forward ever, backwards never. We are always ready for revolution. Be safe, be strong, stay up, and let's win.